Hi, and welcome to the second part in our Procrastination series with me, Dylan.
And me, Jane.
And today we're going to be discussing how perfectionism can also lead into procrastinating and how that affects you.
Yes. So I often see procrastination showing up for people who are very highly driven and successful, especially where they've got either very high standards for themselves and are used to producing and creating um, content and work that's at a very high level, or they have very high expectations placed on them of this massive. They create massive mountains out of things because they know it needs to be done to a certain standard, and then the idea of getting started on a new project or a new block of work just seems like something that they can't quite G themselves up to do. So whenever I encounter this with somebody, aside from whether or not they have too much on their plate and they need to get rid of things, that's part 3 of our procrastination series. If it really is just a case of grab it and get on with it, then I love the Chinese proverb, eat that frog, which you may or may not have heard of. If you haven't heard of it, the idea is that you have a frog that you know you need to eat during the day, and it's a really gross, disgusting feat that you're going to have to eat this frog. Do you either get it done in the morning so it's done and it's not sort of weighing on you all day long, or do you have it there somewhere in the background that you know at some stage during the day ahead you're going to have to eat that frog? So when I use that metaphor just to kind of encourage people really to look at what needs to be done in the day and to really hone in on what is their frog, what's the big, gross, but the project or thing that would bring the most rewards if you actually just get stuck in and get it done. And then once you've identified that, one of the things we were talking about on our podcast series was breaking it down into small chunks. So not necessarily starting with the bit that you find the hardest to get started with, but maybe find the easiest way in. So it might be, as you suggested, like the graph for a report.
Yeah, or if you're doing like some sort of visual element of the report or a report that you might be writing, maybe that's a more creative, fun aspect of it that you could just get stuck into, and having the satisfaction of having done something towards it. It doesn't necessarily have to always be in a linear order.
No.
As long as it's contributing to the bigger goal,
Yeah.
That would be an excellent to start the eating of the frog.
And which foot do you start with?
Yeah.
And it gets the momentum going, and once you get that momentum going, 9 times out of 10, that's the hardest part, and then it's easy from there on, or not necessarily easy, but easier. And the other example I use is if it's out of a work context and you're thinking about your home or your garden, and clutter clearing is another big one that I help people with, and sometimes the immense amount of clutter that people will have. To get started on that, I'll suggest starting with a sock drawer, or starting with the drawer where bits just get dumped in, pens and rubber bands and that kind of thing. So starting with a fairly small area, pulling that out, and then once you've organised that, it becomes easier to then move on to the wardrobe, move on to the boxes that have long been lost in the loft or whatever.
On the previous part 1, where we talked about having positive self-talk and not beating yourself up around feeling guilty for procrastinating and wasting time.
Yeah.
How do you give yourself positive self-talk around completing those small little tasks when you still have this big task ahead of you?
I think, personally, I reassure myself that it is still something that's necessary to the completion of that bigger goal. So it's not that by doing that I'm actually procrastinating, or I'm doing something that's keeping me busy but not really getting anything done. It is actually just as valuable as any other part of the report or project or whatever you're undertaking.
So it's feeling comfortable about you actually doing something. It's taking ownership for that part and feeling comfortable about it.
Yeah, or accepting that it has a value.
Yeah.
And being encouraging to yourself in your self-talk, rather than, oh, well, I'm only doing this, so it doesn't really count.
I'm doing like the easy part.
And the other way that procrastination can show up, and kind of we don't necessarily see it as procrastination or realise it's what we're doing, but it's busyness. So nowadays it's almost like busyness is like a badge of honour, we're this, we're that, we're too busy. And so we can feel as though we're accomplishing something as long as we're being busy, but really in being busy we're not always getting much done at all. And
Do you think some people wouldn't see that as procrastination sometimes?
Yeah,
They wouldn't
I think
identify it
that's
as
why
that.
it catches them out. I do think so. Yeah. And it's the way that you can lose a week, lose a month, lose a year, and suddenly think like, what have I got to show for this last week, year, month? I've been busy the whole time, but you haven't been doing the things. Are those frogs? So get busy, but with the little bits that contribute to the big projects, rather than all the stuff that we could be busy with our whole lives if we let ourselves.
So people work in different ways, obviously, and have different methods of planning, but would you suggest any kind of routine or planning method that would help to organise and understand what the bigger tasks are clearly, and what these little busy tasks would be that you could either avoid or could schedule at another time around the bigger tasks?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think everybody has their own unique kind of sense of inner rhythm and a way of working through the day. And I think some people, for example, are morning people, other people are afternoon or evening people. And fortunately, one of the upsides of, say, lockdown, for example, is that there's more flexibility with when we do things and what we fit around our work for some people. And I think it's looking at what would be the best time of the day for you to get stuck in and do the big task. So I used the frog example and talked about doing it first thing in the morning. But if you're not really a morning person, and if you take until 10 to really get going, then your time for eating that frog might be at 10 o'clock. And you might just need to ease yourself into the day earlier on.
But would you advise, or I guess it depends what works for different people, but would you write down your tasks, or would you organise them in such a way that that you've recorded them so you can see them visually? Or
again, I think it depends on the person. So some people planning it out and having even just the task of planning it out can help them to feel as though there's a structure there in the background. They might not even look at that plan again.
See, I love the idea of that, but I don't think I would ever do it.
Well, see, it wouldn't be the right one for you.
Yeah.
But for somebody else, that would work
It could be
great.
the perfect thing,
you know,
yeah,
and
exactly.
a schedule can really work for some people. So I think it's about finding what's right for you, and thinking that way, questioning yourself, what would work for me, and looking at when have things gone really well in the past, and what were you using then to support you? Were you using a schedule? Did you have somebody poking you, like holding you accountable to taking action? Sometimes it's as simple as putting kind of an accountability system in place. For example, if I have to do some physiotherapy exercises at any stage, if I don't have somebody checking in on me and making sure I do them, I won't do them. But if I have some other task, I don't need that accountability. I'll just get on with it. So it varies.
And I like the idea that looking at things that you've done well in the past is as important as, well, it's more important than looking at things that you haven't done well, which is a habit I could go into sometimes. Well, I haven't done this well before, I haven't done this well. But actually giving yourself credit and thinking about and giving some thought to what you've done well and why did you do it well.
Yeah, and why did it work?
Yeah, exactly.
And so looking at, say, for example, the approach you took to running a marathon, you would have made sure that you planned in and did all the training that was required, right? You didn't just cram it all in at the last minute and do yourself an injury, right? You actually did follow a system and a
which
schedule.
sometimes, which I don't normally do.
No,
but
you did
I guess I did it.
context.
And if I look at it in that context, actually, I did. I had a plan and I broadly stuck to it.
So you look at that. That was a positive. That worked in relationship to that task.
Yeah.
And you could then arguably transfer that into another part of your life. Like
Definitely not another marathon.
But you could transfer it into work.
Yeah.
And so I think I would encourage you to look at where you've been successful in one area of your life and what helped you have that success, and take the core parts of that and then bring them into another part of your life where maybe you feel you're finding it more challenging.
And Jane, is there any other nuggets of wisdom that you can offer us?
I don't know how wise it is, but for what it's worth, I find it very helpful. That if you have
hungry dog
perfectionism, due to setting a bar really high for yourself, as I mentioned earlier, another thing you can do that will help is to lower the bar. So accept that good is good enough. It doesn't always need to be absolutely polished and absolutely perfect. If we, for example, allowed things to only ever be good, to only ever to go out if they were absolutely perfect, then we would have stopped the recording 10 times over because of our dog, for example. So good is good enough. Give yourself a break. That doesn't always have to be so polished and and perfect.
So just to recap, if your perfectionism is leading you to procrastinate, here are the 3 main takeaways from today's session. Number 1, eat that frog. Do the biggest, most difficult thing as early on into your day as possible, and at a time that obviously suits you and when you are at your most productive. Number 2?
Number 2 is to start with the easiest in with that big frog. So start with the bit that's easiest to get started with rather than putting it off.
And number 3, good is good enough. So don't strive for perfection in every task that you do. Getting it done is more important than getting it done perfectly. Next time we're going to be talking about procrastination in a different setting.
Yes, and how you may need to watch out for procrastination actually being a result of you having taken on too much.